players. Welcome to this quick start guide to the Opus1 Gouger and the Fillotine. This video is designed for oboe players who are new to gouging. Maybe this is their first machine, or maybe they've just used a school machine for a while or borrowed a friend's machine, but they're relatively new to gouging. So if you're more experienced, this may be helpful to watch as well, but it's intended more for someone who is just starting out. So when we're going to gouge cane, we begin with something called tube cane. It looks like this. And we want to make sure that the cane is straight and that there's no bows to the cane. This piece is not so great there. Let's find another piece. This is better. And we want to find a diameter here for the cane that is 10.5 millimeters. And you can use a little radius gauge, reading 10.5, and put the cane inside the radius gauge like this. And it's easier to read it with the radius gauge on top and put a light source behind it, and you can see the light coming between the radius gauge and the cane if it's not matching well. And then when you find an area that's 10.5, travel up and down the cane this way to make sure it stays consistent. You want the piece to not have any change in diameter as it travels down. That would not work. Okay, once I find an area that looks like it's about 10.5, I take an arrow to split my cane into thirds. You can also use a razor blade or a reed knife, various things. I use an arrow because it's fast and I do so much cane that it just makes it easier for me. And I'll put the arrow down and I'll sight between the two blades of the arrow, and I will find that curve that I just picked a second ago, the arc of 10.5 millimeters. And when I find it, I will tap it on the table, push the arrow down, and take out that particular piece. Now sometimes you can get more than one piece out of a tube if it's very round. But since it's organic material, it's not really perfectly round, and so sometimes you may only just get one piece, sometimes no piece, if it's not in good shape. Now, when the cane is harvested in the cane fields, usually areas southern France or California or Mexico, China, they all have good cane fields. Any place that has good wine tends to have good cane. And also, years that were good for wine tend to also be years that were good for cane. So that's a little bit of a fun little trivia fact there. It seems to be true. Now, when they cut the cane in the fields, they chop the cane at the knots. And so what happens is the grain is going to move towards those knots, kind of like in a tree, how the limb, if you look at the grain of the wood, it moves around the limbs. So you want to find a piece in the middle that's away from the knots, or like away from the limb in a piece of wood, that gives you the straightest grain. And so I usually end up having to cut about a 1/2 inch off the first end. And that's indeed the case with this piece as well. And to do this, I will take the piece of cane and I'll put it against the blade inside the fillotine. Then I'll raise the blade up, push the 1/2 inch of cane through that I just determined would be the right amount, and then chop it. And I'll inspect it to make sure that the surface is nice and smooth here where it cuts. If there's any divots or holes, that could indicate there could be a problem with the guillotine, and you may want to have that looked at. But it should be nice and flush. Okay, now that that's cut there, I will use that and cut the cane out to length, putting that cut end over here against the cane stop, holding it with my finger. And the fillotines is a new little addition to them now. It's a little outrigger arm, which helps balance the fillotine when you're chopping. It's a new thing. I kind of like that quite a lot. So the cane is set inside there to proper length, and I'll cut the last part, and it cuts it to length. And I'll try one more piece. Now I'll cut the first little section off, and then I put it aside here now and cut it this way to length. Okay, now that it's cut to length, I will take the push rod for the fillotine and put the blade in the bed of the filier and push it forward with my finger until it comes in contact with the blade, keeping the cane down in the bottom of the bed surface. And then I'll take my other finger and push down back here just to stabilize the cane in the bed, and take my push rod and get it going, and then push it through like that. Then I'll take my second piece and do the same thing. Hold it right in front of the blade. Now the blade is low, so it's not going to hurt you because it's protected. It is sharp, but it's not in an area that could cut you. So don't worry about being close to the blade when you do this. And tap it again, and see the second piece pushes out the first piece. And so you can actually go through and fill your tons of cane at one time, just taking it and just push, and they keep falling out at the other end. And when you finish, just take out the last piece. And then I always store my handle in the little hole like that. Now you can also mount this permanently on your desk. It has little stops right now back here, but you can actually put two drywall screws through these holes into a nice wooden desk that's like a work desk. You know, I wouldn't use nice furniture, obviously, but then it'll be permanently mounted. But if you don't want it permanently mounted, you have these little stops here, so you can move it to the side when you're finished. There are two gauges that have been machined into the base of the Opus1 Gouger to help make sure that the cane is prepared correctly to be used in the bed. The first one is this cane width gauge here on the side. Now the piece of cane should be 8 millimeters across the flat surface so that it gouges appropriately in the bed. If it's wider than that, it would be rubbing on the guide too high and might not finish the gouge process. It may actually not let the blade get to the very bottom of its gouge because it's rubbing too high up in the guide. So it should be 8 millimeters, so it should fit inside the slot. Now, if there's a lot of play inside there, then it's narrower than 8. So you want it to just fit inside there as 8 millimeters. Because if it's narrower than 8, that also will change the outcome of the gouge as well. So 8 millimeters, and use this guide to check that. Now, on the back of the gouger, there is another guide or gauge that has been machined into the base. And this gauge is for determining the length of the cane. You see the cane should fit right inside that recess there. And that determines the chop length of the cane. And all the stuff should be set correctly on the Fillotine as you get it. But this is just a way to check it in the future. Or if you have cane given to you by somebody else, you want to verify that it will work best under the gouger. And the reason you want it to be cut to the right length is so that the cane is touching the cane stops at both ends. If it's too short and this closes up against the cane, it won't be coming in contact, and so it won't work, and that's not a good thing. If the cane is too long, then it will be engaging too early on this cane stop and have more pressure on the cane than you need to have. So you want to make sure that it's cut to the length set up by that gauge in the back of the machine. And if you do that, then the cane should be in the best dimension shape that it should be in to work with the Opus1 Gouger. Now, once the cane is soaked, I soak the cane in warm water, soup hot I call it, for about 15 minutes. And you don't want it to be too hot because that'll be bad for the cane, because it is a plant and it'll cook it, you know. So you don't want to boil it. But you want it warm water because you want the vascular bundles to swell so that water can go into them more quickly. If the water is cold, it will take longer for it to soak for that reason. So once it's soaked about 15 minutes, I will find a piece of cane that has a twist to it. It's flexible, but not too flexible. If I can't move it at all, it's too steely, I won't use it because it's going to be too hard. If it turns too easily, it's kind of spaghetti-ish, I won't use that as well too. I want just a bit of force against, a little bit of resistance against my twisting, so I can feel that the cane has some strength, but yet it is able to be flexible, so it will vibrate. So then I'll take my reed knife and I will cut off the last, I'll go up about a ½ inch and cut off the outer third of the piece of cane. Go up about a ½ inch, just like you're peeling or paring an apple. Cut off the outer third, and you see you get like a little wedge there. And do that to both ends. This is not a critical dimension, but what it does though is it allows it, when it's in the gouger bed, it allows the blade to feed itself gradually up to the sides so that it's not an abrupt entrance of the blade into the piece of cane, and tends to have better results for the side dimension of the gouge. And also when you're shaping it, having that cane gone is just less material to be shaped. So it's a secondary benefit. Okay, now let's pull this camera forward a little bit. In gouging, you want to make sure the bed is clean. There's no cane inside there. And what I want to do, see that the bed has something called a cane grip system. See, this pulls back here a little bit. And what happens is that these brass cane stops actually hold the cane at both ends with light pressure. And the clips also hold the cane down too. But this prevents the cane from migrating in the bed, in or out, as it's gouging. So to use this, I put the piece of cane in against the left cane stop, put the clip down against the piece of cane. Then I'll pull back this cane stop and I will line the piece of cane in the bed so it's exactly in the middle. Close the cane stop, and then I'll pull back on this little bracket here. And the cane will pop down into the bed by the force of this clip. And then when you release it, the cane is very secure in the bed. You can gouge it and it won't move. Okay, now I put my thumb against a little recess right here on the side of the post, and my other finger on the other side of the post, and my left thumb will go in front of the blade opening here. And that's the area which has the force down while you gouge. The thumb and your right hand is the force pushing this way as you gouge. And it's slightly down as well, so it's like a 45-degree angle. But so what I'll do first, and these fingers are just kind of out of the way back here. So at first I will draw the carriage back. Oh, and actually before I gouge, I will take some WD-40 and I will spray a little spritz on the rod on both sides. And then work the carriage back and forth, and that gets it very lubricated. And this way, it's less friction. You can feel the cutting action better when the carriage slides easily. So I'll close the carriage down on the piece of cane, and I'll draw the carriage back, and then I will feed it forward, and I'll cut down about 5 or so passes. And I'll look at the chips, and I want to have, as it cuts into it, when it gets into the can, I want a pretty complete chip there, and it should be 0.05 millimeters in thickness. If it's thicker than that, there's too much blade exposed. And if it is thinner than that, there's not enough blade exposed and it won't finish the gouge. So about 0.05 millimeters is what you're looking for. Okay, once that side finishes, I will pull this clip back with my third finger. I will grab the little gripper bar here on the cane grip and use my index finger on the top of this right clip, and I'll pull that back, and then I will pull the cane out like that. Then flip it over, put it back in under the left clip, get that centered, pull that back, and then I proceed to gouge on this side. Now this is a double radius gouge, which means that this inside curve of the blade, the part that's between the blade and the rod, that's the primary cutting curve, and that's that edge of that half of the blade will be cutting both walls of the cane. And so that gives you symmetry. What happens is you also have, you have the radius on the inside and you have the radius on the outside. The radius cuts here, the primary curve, and the outside radius cuts the relief curve as it cuts down into the cane. And so for that reason, you have one radius, two radiuses. That's a double radius. There's also a single radius gouge, which cuts right down the middle. And they work fine, but sometimes there's an issue with symmetry on the curve with that machine, because as the cane or the gouge is cutting, it's going down radially into the cane like that. And so this inside part of the blade is actually cutting more cane longer than the outside of the blade, because it comes in contact on the inside first, and as it goes down and gets deeper, it begins to cut on the outside. And so it's cutting more on the inside, which means it's going to wear more on the inside. And so for that reason, you want to have a double radius. And so that maintains symmetry, because even if the blade wears slightly, that same curve cuts both walls. Okay, and so some cane came up, so I'll flip it again. And I find that whenever any cane comes up, I'll always want to flip it again, so that I have no cane coming up in both directions. Some came up, so I'm going to flip it one more time. And I also make sure to keep the bed clean. There's no debris inside there, and I make sure there's no debris on the bark, so everything fits into the bed just right. And I pull the cane out of here so I can see if something new comes up. I'll know that that's new from this particular pass. Okay, that looks pretty good. And you can sight down the piece of cane this way to sort of see how the curve looks, how the sides look compared to the center. But to check that officially, you'll use your indicator. Measure the center, and you want it to be 60 in the center which we are, and then going halfway down to the ribs, it's about 55, halfway in the ribs. And then behind the ears, it's about 48 out there. That's about 47 of this piece of cane here. And then on the very sides, about 38 on this piece of cane. It's nice to find the very, very sides because it's a consistent width, and that's a good way to sort of tell you if you're ripping on the sides or not, because the measurement will change a lot if there's a problem out there. So it's good to look at that number just to have that as a go-to number on the sides when you're measuring it. And then I'll check the ends as well to make sure they're the same as the middle. And that's good. So the next check with this is I'll take the piece of cane between my finger and I will slightly bend it with its bark side up, and I'll hold it here, and then I will push down up here on this end, and I'll watch where the cane creases, where it yields. And it should be straight across. It shouldn't be at an angle this way or that way. And you should feel the resistance of the yield. If it folds too easily, then it's probably too weak in the sides. But you get a good feel for just the strength of that, and that'll give you an idea of the strength of the opening of the reed, the spring the cane's going to have. And that's pretty much how you gouge a piece of cane on the Opus1. Then when I finish, I'll take a cotton swab, I'll wipe off the blade, and kind of push the cotton swab into the blade, close it up, take my WD-40 and spray some inside there, and then I will clean everything off. You want to keep it pretty clean because you don't want, the gouger to rust because you're gouging, wet material. So keep it kind of dry and keep WD-40 in it. Well, that's pretty much how you gouge with the Opus1 Gouger. Now you may have noticed I gouge on my lap, and I do that so that I can actually see down inside the carriage as I'm gouging. But some people prefer to gouge on a table, and you could do that by putting little brackets around the gouger, little angle brackets, and that helps secure the gouger in place as you go back and forth. But I've always gouged in my lap and do most of my work on my lap. It's kind of old school a little bit. And because like I said, I can see down to the carriage better and have a better feel, like I'm more over the gouging machine as I'm working. Okay, we're going to be having a lot more videos coming out on the gouger with a colleague of mine, Dana Sundad. We have a little channel called the Oboe Doctors, and we're going to be talking about different topics about oboe playing, reed making, gouging, just anything to do with the oboe. And we've got some videos up there now, and if you could leave comments in the videos, it'll give us an idea of certain topics that we can cover in the future that you might be interested in. Also, if you go over to the Opus1 Gouger website, there is a whole section called the Gouger University, and there's going to be videos there as well that talk about different aspects of working with the gouger, different levels of complication, like changing the blade eventually, maybe making adjustments to the gouger, and selecting cane and various topics like that. And so hopefully you'll take a chance and look at those and see if you have anything that you have any questions about, you can ask us. So thank you so much for watching, and best of luck making great reeds. Okay, thanks. Bye-bye.